Hello and welcome everyone to today's Oracle Red Bull Racing hands-on lab to discover the best race of all time. My name is Terry Van Cleef and I'm a marketing event manager for the developer initiative here at Oracle. We're excited to experiment with race data to discover what makes a race great. If you do not currently have an Oracle Cloud account, we've got a special promotion that will be dropping in the chat in a moment so that you can try out the services and follow along with the lab steps today. We'll also be recording the session, so if you'd like to complete the lab later on, we'll be sending the link to the recording via email shortly after the workshop concludes. If you have any questions during the workshop, please ask them in the Slack channel and we'll answer them throughout the session. The link to join is bit.ly/devrel on Slack. Once you're in, you'll land in the general channel, and from there you can search for #lab racing to the cloud. Today's workshop will be presented by Brian Mcdonald, Master Principal Cloud Architect. Special thanks to Olivier Perard, Director of Software Engineers, who will be helping with Q&A today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Brian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian McDonald. I'm a Master Cloud Principal Architect, Cloud Architect, and I'm also a data science. And I've been with Oracle for a little over 25 years now, helping our customers analyze data to solve all their very complex business problems. But over the last probably decade or so, I've really been focused on the predictive analytics, what is now called data science and machine learning and artificial intelligence, or AI. But what we're going to talk today about is how to leverage our Oracle Cloud technology for doing predictions, particularly around F1 data. I work with our partner, the Oracle Red Bull Racing team, for both their real-world team and their esports teams, leveraging this technology for a wide range of use cases. So while I can't divulge all the top secret wonderful things we do to help them lead in both the championship and driver championship at this point, do want to kind of give you an idea of how we can leverage all this data to look at what makes a good race. So I'm going to be using a combination of PowerPoints and walking you through the labs. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to look at some historical F1 data to look at, what makes an F1 race exciting. So there can be lots of reasons on why this could happen. It's, are there a lot of overtakes? Does weather have to do with it? Most people have a gut feeling of what is a good race, but we're going to do this with numerical data. And, there's some data out there that exists that allows people to rate races. So we're going to use that as kind of our target on what makes a good race. And we'll go through a series of screens of, using Oracle technology to build a machine learning model and visualize the results to come up with this model. And we'll evaluate it and identify what the characteristics are that make up this race. So with that, let's kind of talk about the specifics. So we're going to go through a series of both labs and presentations. So we'll start off with preparing your cloud environment. Some of you may have started this ahead of time by setting up the cloud, getting everything ready. Others might not. We'll set up all the services. I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do and some basics of machine learning. We'll go through the exercises. I'll do a combination of walkthrough, and maybe I'll just demonstrate it if we're using up a little more time, because I do want to get to the end and finish on time. The one thing that I want to remind everybody is you have the choice of how you want to work in this lab. You can either watch me go through the steps, or you can try and go through all the steps yourself as we discuss this. I do want to kind of caution that if you do it while I'm speaking, it might be tough to finish in the 90 minutes. So don't get frustrated. You can always go back. You'll have your cloud trial available to go back and play around as much as you want after our hands-on lab. So let's first talk about preparing your cloud environment. So if you click on this bit.ly link, you'll get to our cloud infrastructure free tier, and you can click on the little icon down at the bottom that you see highlighted over here that says start for free. Your email should have been added as a special promo, so no credit cards. You'll just be able to get access into this environment. So if you start doing that, we'll go through the different steps, and I'm going to kind of toggle my screen over now to the actual lab we're going to work through. So when you click on your lab, you'll get to this screen on that bit.ly. You'll just click on the start, and what that'll do is it'll get you to this web page, which is all the instructions for this workshop. And you'll be able to walk through each and every step of our workshop here. Now, the first part is just going through an introduction. Where we're going to get started is in going through and logging into the tenancy. So I'm already logged into my tenancy, so I'm not going to kind of go to the page, but just to kind of orient you, you'll see a web page that's here, and you'll enter your cloud account name, and you'll enter your tenancy name that you got when you signed up. As you scroll down, you're going to want to expand a little arrow here for login. You might see something up here, which is a single sign-on, or using Oracle Identity Cloud Service. For your free tier, you're not going to be using those. Make sure you click on this little arrow, expand it to the direct sign-in, and then you'll enter your credentials, and then you will get into the Oracle Cloud Console. This is how you interact with all of the Oracle Web Services. So that's really the easy part, just logging in and getting access to all of the wonderful things in Oracle Cloud infrastructure. So let's start looking at the labs. So we're going to deploy two services. We're going to deploy an Oracle Analytics Cloud, which is our visualization tool, which allows us to create visualizations, graphs, charts, tables, and interact with it in many ways. And we're also going to create the autonomous data warehouse, which is an automatic data warehouse that handles all the database administrator tasks, like expanding and taking care of storage and tuning as things go along. So we'll set those up in just a quick couple of minutes. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to provision the analytics cloud. So this visualization, I'll expand all these tasks so we can see them. So the first thing I want to kind of point you to is, for the analytics cloud, we have to use a federated user login. So after you've already logged in, what you're going to want to do is go up to this little icon here. So I'm going to kind of switch over, and now I'm in my tenancy. This tenancy is where all our information is. And we click on here, and you can see that I'm using the Oracle Identity Cloud Service. This is a requirement for setting up Oracle Analytics Cloud. So make sure you can see that here. If you don't see that, then you want to go to cloud.oracle.com, type in your name, and then log in with your username and password. And that should make everything okay. If it doesn't, type something into our Slack channel, and we can start creating everything. So at this point, you can now start creating your instance. So rather than walking through these points, let me just quickly show you what that looks like. So I can come in here, and you'll come to your analytics and AI services and your analytics cloud. And I'm going to open this in a new tab just because I want to leave my existing one there. And what you're going to want to do after this refreshes is you're going to want to create a new instance. So you can use the root one for your trial instances. And we won't get into definitions. But what you'll do is, according to the workshop notes, you are going to fill in these values. So you'll fill in, I'll just copy and paste. So we'll give it a name of Red Bull Analytics as the name of this instance. You can give it a description if you like. And I often find this is handy as you may have multiple instances. What compartment you're in. We have the ability to specify different types of capacity, whether it's a OCPU, meaning how many CPUs do you want for this instance, or do you want to base it on the number of users? So those are different licensing capabilities. You can specify license included, which means that we're not going to charge you explicitly for the license, but for some customers who might already have their own licenses for prior versions of OAC, which was called Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, they might want to do that. We're just going to click on license included. There's two different versions, a professional edition or an enterprise edition. The enterprise edition has a lot more capabilities and features. We'll do that. And then you'll click on create. And when you click on create, I'm not going to do this right now. It will create a new analytics instance. And that will take a couple of minutes to do. So when you click on that, you'll get a little item in the upper left-hand corner that says OAC created. And that's all you need to do to create your instance. So walk through that, you'll have your instance creation. The next one is creating the data warehouse. So the Autonomous Data Warehouse instance is where we're going to put all of our data. So similar to how we created Oracle Analytics Cloud, we can do the same things for the Oracle database, for the analytic or the Autonomous Data Warehouse. So here I can come down to Oracle databases, but I will point out something here. You'll see on my home, it's actually showing me all the services that I use commonly. I've pinned certain items, but I've gone to Autonomous Data Warehouse before. Since you haven't visited it before, you'll probably just come in here to Oracle Database, click on Autonomous Data Warehouse, and you'll get the screen to create your Autonomous Warehouse. So just like we did with Oracle Analytics Cloud, we'll say create Autonomous Data Warehouse. We'll pick the compartment, which is really just that holding place of where things want, what you want the display name to be, and we're going to use something that's not auto-assigned. We'll call it Red Bull. Same thing for the database name. And for the Autonomous Data Warehouse, we have lots of different options. We can create a database that's tuned for data warehousing and analytics. We could create one for transaction processing. We can create one that's tuned for JSON capabilities, or we can create one that just will support Apex, which is our low-code application development environment. Again, we're going to use data warehouse. You'll have the choice between using shared infrastructure or dedicated infrastructure. Typically, shared infrastructure is the most cost-effective way to run this, all the same capabilities. And then we can configure our database. You can choose what database version you want. My instance only has 9C available. And again, we will pick one OCPU. You can also select what's called auto-scaling. And what this means is if you saturate that CPU, say you have more than, you're at 100%, the Autonomous Data Warehouse will automatically add up to 3 times as many CPUs to support that workload. So what that does is it allows you to really control costs by setting the CPU use at your typical workloads. But if you get peaks, you can scale that up. We'll specify 1 terabyte of storage. You'll use auto scaling, or we don't have to use auto scaling. And then you will enter a ID and password. And the last thing you could do is there's lots of options about access. We'll pick secure access from everywhere. These other 2 options are if you want more control on restricted access through VPNs or other options. And again, we'll click license and include it. You can even put an email in here for any notifications. And then you'll create your autonomous data warehouse. And at that point, OAC is being created, probably is done by now, and the autonomous data warehouse is also going to be created, and that'll just take a few minutes. So let's go back to my slide deck for just a second. And what I'd like to do now is kind of just walk through what we're going to do with a little bit of introduction into machine learning. So for those who are not practiced data scientists or haven't studied what machine learning is it's really just a way to use a computer to automatically, although automatically is probably a too wide a term, to look through large amounts of data to discover patterns so that you can make predictions and find insights into this data. It's really just crunching a bunch of numbers based on a wide range of algorithms to identify patterns. That's the simplest way to think of it. So let's look at a quick example. So an example of this is, let's say we wanted to predict the sales price of homes based on the size of the home. And here it's in square meters. So here's a chart that's showing each dot representing a individual home, the size of the home along the x-axis, and the sales price along the y-axis. And just by looking at this, you can kind of see that there's a pattern, which makes sense, that as the size increases, the value of the home increases as well. And using statistics and machine learning, you can create a line that does what's called a fit. And this is a type of analytics that probably a lot of you are familiar with, called regression, a type of machine learning or statistics that you can use machine learning for. So you get this fit, and then what you can do at any given point is say, well, if I have a house of 200 square meters, what would the price be, by looking up at this line and coming across, and it's right around 400K. Now, this is a very simple model where we had one input feature of size and we're predicting sales price. But in the real world, you would think you'd have how old the house is based on the year built, neighborhood, bathrooms, et cetera, to predict it. So you have these multiple input features predicting the price. Well, this also applies to racing. So the data we have available for our project today is around races. So we'll have a list of races, starting, we're looking from I think our data starts around 2010, goes up to 220, actually 221, I believe, is in there partially, for the year and the race name. And then we have the round, so was this the first race, second race, third race of the year? We have the weather conditions, whether it's wet, how many times cars overtook other cars, which is interesting, right? If you're thinking about what's the most exciting race, well, how often people pass each other is probably important. How many people finish the race, which would lead to congestion on the racetrack. And there's a whole wide range of these. But ultimately, we're getting to these scores from racefans.net, which actually surveyed fans and said, how exciting is this race? So if we map this data to kind of our problem of building a model, well, these are all of our input features: the name, the weather condition, the overtake positions, and then the score is what we're working on predicting. So what is going to be the most relevant metrics? Is it the number of overtakes, weather, circuit, the location of the race? Is it the number of DNFs? Is it based on where people started? Well, we're going to look through all of this data and try and figure this out. So the process that we're going to do, that we're going to go to find out the solution, is first we're going to load a bunch of data into the database. And then we're going to look at a set of input features, just like we saw here. So this will be training data until the end of 2009. We're then going to pass it through some training algorithm using the Oracle machine learning capabilities in your autonomous data warehouse. And we're actually going to use a feature called AutoML, which makes it very easy to go through lots of permutations of models without you having to be extremely knowledgeable data scientists. And ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to create a model. This model is then going to be used to help with our predictions. And we're going to pass in a set of test data from 2020. Now, if you look at the two tables, you'll notice that the test data doesn't have this score column in it. Well, that's because we're predicting. We don't know what the answer is. And theoretically, you can do this for the race coming up for this weekend in Singapore. So this is what we're going to predict to get an end result, which might be, for in this example, 2021 Bahrain. We predict an 8.53. And ultimately, we can then visualize all these results in Oracle Analytics Cloud. And we can do this with a graph showing both the score, which you see in blue, as well as what was the predicted value. And in this case, you can see they're actually very closely aligned, with some of the points being, nearly spot on. So that's what we are going to do for our exercise. So the next couple of steps we're going to do is we're going to load the data and do basic data exploration. So for loading the data, we're going to do something simple. We're going to create a new database user, and then we're going to load the data into our autonomous data warehouse. So let's get started with these capabilities. So let me switch back to my display. So when we come to our workshop screen, we're now going to be going into lab 3. So if I expand all these, we'll see all our capabilities. I'm going to actually now go into my autonomous warehouse. So I'm not going to show the steps as I go through them, but I'll click through everything. So I'm going to exit out of here, and you'll see right now that I have my autonomous data warehouse instance. And on this screen, you see, well, actually, first, according to the instructions, you'll end up on a screen that looks like this. And I will have to go to a different area for my database. I have a Red Bull hands-on. So what you just saw were different compartments. So you'll see Red Bull, it's dedicated, 1 CPU, 1 terabyte storage, etc. So when I click on here, we get to a screen that tells you a lot of information. So as an administrator, this is all information about my instance. But what's important for me as a user is clicking on database actions. And what this will open up is another screen that will allow me to interact with my database. So you'll click on database actions, and then here you'll see a bunch of development tools. We're going to be working a lot with SQL. You can create charts here. You can deal with JSON. There's schedulers. There's a whole wide range of data tools. But first, what we want to do is we want to go to our SQL, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to add a new user. Up here, we see that we're logged in as the admin user, and that's not kind of who we want to use. So what you're going to need to do is run a script. We're not going to actually step through everything, but if you come to your workshop, you will download a Red Bull create user SQL script. So that's going to download to my machine. And then what you can do is you will open that up. In fact, you'll open that up, and then you'll paste it into the screen. Now you're not going to see me opening this up on my desktop, but I'm just going to copy the text, paste it in here, and then what you're going to want to do is execute this script. And if you're familiar with SQL, there's a bunch of information about creating a user, creating the tables, etc. And then we'll load the data. The thing you're going to want to do is there's 2 run here's. run commands. You can run an individual statement. You're going to want to run the whole script. And I actually didn't want to run that because I've already done this, and I'm going to get a bunch of errors saying the table already exists. For you, you'll see that it says objects created. At this point, we want to load all the database tables. So let me kind of pull up my lab again. So at this point, we're going to want to upload data tables. So to do this, you'll click on each of these files and download the data. So that's the first thing you're going to do. Then you're going to switch to your new user, your F1 user. So you're going to come here, switch from admin, you're going to sign out, and then you're going to re-sign back in as your F1 user. And if you forget what the password is, you can look in the script you downloaded, and it will be there. And it's actually Oracle_12345. So I'm going to paste that in here. Since this is shared, you can see that's your password, and we'll log in. So now we're going to get to the same environment we were looking at before, but now we're logged in as this F1 user, which is the schema that we're going to load all our data in. So the last step we need to do is we need to load our data. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click under Data Tools. You're going to click on Data Load. And we're going to specify a local file. But you can also load from remote databases. If you're using cloud storage like Oracle's object storage or S3 from AWS or Azure or GCP, you can load from there as well. But we're just going to load from a local file system, which hopefully everybody has downloaded. What you next do is you will next select the files that you want to download. Now, hopefully, I've got all these still here. So I do. So I'm just going to, hopefully you guys are seeing my screen, but if my pop-up's not being shared, I'm just selecting the files that I downloaded, and there are 6 of them. And what it'll now do is it'll start sampling the data and preparing it to load all of your information. So this will just take 1 second. And now we see all 6 of those files. We could run these as is right now, but there is something we're going to want to change. If you want to change the properties, and the Autonomous Data Warehouse does a lot of, uses machine learning to identify the files and what's the best way to load it. Typically, it starts off with saying create table. For each one of these files, you want to click in here and say we're going to insert into table. And that's because in that prior script we ran, it already created the table for us. But if this is a brand new table, you say create table, and it'll load everything in. And it figures out what the encoding, text enclosures, the field delimiter, number of rows to skip, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll do that for all 6 files. And when you're ready, you will click on the run button. I'm not going to do this because then I'll have twice as many rows in my table. But you'll click that. It'll take about 1 minute to 2 minutes to run. And at this point, we are done with lab number 3. So just to kind of recap where we are, we created the service for Oracle Analytics Cloud. We created an Autonomous Data Warehouse instance for us to store our data. We downloaded some data files. We created a schema and a user called F1 for our tables. And we also now have loaded all of the data into the data warehouse. So a lot of this is kind of just basic stuff, right? It's stuff, if you're really going to start building some models, are probably already done. But since this is a lab starting from start, we had to do that. But now we've got data, and that's the fun part. So now we can start exploring all this data. So we're going to head on over to our lab, and we're going to go to some basic explorations of the data. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Oracle Analytics Cloud, connect to that database, and start exploring the data to look at, what this data looks like, trying to identify the factors that we might think are relevant for building a model. So this part was going to involve several different labs with, I'll be doing a bunch of clicking and moving things around. So if you're doing the lab along with me, this is where if you're trying to pay attention, you might fall back. But we're going to look at the races and the lap times data set. So expand all these, and you'll see all the tasks we're gonna go through. So the first thing is, again, going to Analytics Cloud. So to do that, I'm going to come back here. You will click on your hamburger menu, go to Analytics Cloud, go back to Analytics Cloud here. I'm going to have to switch to a different compartment for mine, and you'll see actually I have two instances of Oracle Analytics Cloud. One that's inactive, so we're not being charged for this, and the one we're going to use. You'll click on the one that you have that we created for the Red Bull Hands-On Lab, and it'll get you to a screen that looks like this. So that's one thing. But there's actually a step we need to do before this. And that's from our database instance. Because we need a way to connect from Oracle Analytics Cloud to the database. So I skipped ahead. If you're following along in the lab, I actually skipped ahead. I'm going to use my back arrow and just go back to my autonomous data warehouse screen. Or you can go through as a lab and click on the hamburger menu. But what we want to do now is we want to get what's called the wallet. And the wallet contains all the information to connect to the database. So again, you can click on your database actions tab, which will get you here. And actually, one second. Sorry, I'm looking at the instructions are different. We're going to want to come to this button called the database connections. And the database connection is where you can get access. So this will pull up, you'll tell you stuff about the different ways to access, but you're going to want to download this instant wallet. So the simplest thing is say instant wallet, click on download wallet. You'll give it a password, and you can call it anything you want. Just you need to use 80 to 60 characters, contain one alphanumeric and one numeric. So we try to enforce security, and luckily I did that. Click download, and it will now download a zip file that contains all the information about your instance, how to find it, and how to connect it. It doesn't have an ID and password installed, so it's nothing's encoded there. You'll have to set that up when we connect to our Analytics Cloud. So while that's downloading, a little slow for me today, probably because of Zoom sharing. I've already downloaded mine. So I'm going to come back to my Oracle Analytics Cloud. So I've already come back in. I've connected to my Analytics homepage, and we're now looking at Oracle Analytics. So the first thing you want to do in here to connect to the database is we'll click on create. Now you see a lot of stuff in here because we use this for a lot of items. So there's a lot of information created already, but I'm going to want to create a connection. And a connection is something where we say, I want to connect to a data source. And you'll see there's a wide range of connections. So we're working with the fabulous autonomous data warehouse. but we can connect to other databases. We can connect to other cloud services, Google Analytics. You can look through all the lists where we have predefined connectors to connect to those data sources. But for this, we'll just connect to the autonomous data warehouse. And we'll have to give it a name. We're going to call it Red Bull. You can put a description in if you like. We're going to need to select your credentials file. So you come and say select. You will go to wherever your wallet was. So I have this wallet Red Bull 1, and it'll pick out the credentials object. So it automatically went in and found this. You'll give the username F1. You'll pass in your password again from before. It was something Oracle 1, 2, Oracle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you specify what's called a service name. So Autonomous Data Warehouse gives you different ways to connect with how much load you want to put on the system. If you say Red Bull High, it offers the most level of parallelization and will take as much of the availability of the machine as possible, which is good if you're the only user or you have a workload that has high demand. But if you're sharing this with lots of users, you might want to use medium access, which offers parallelization, but not to the same extent. So there's a lot of subtleties that we can discuss. For now, just select high and you'll click on save. We now have a connection, which now knows, or OAC now knows how to connect to the autonomous data warehouse. So what we now need to do is tell Oracle Analytics Cloud how to connect to these sources. So I am going to first click on, or I shouldn't say first, I've already done stuff. I'm going to click on create to add what's called a data set. So you can think of a data set as a mapping to an individual table. So what we're going to do here is, again, you see multiple different things, but we have this object called Red Bull, or this connection. So now I'm saying I'm connecting to this database. So an administrator would probably set up the connection, but then any user who wants to access data just says, I want to connect to this information. Now you can scroll through the different schemas, and we see everything in the database. We see our F1 table, and then a bunch of DM stuff. This is data mining tables that I have used from prior items or prior runs. And I can just drag races, the table races, into this little area here. And what it'll now do is Oracle Analytics Cloud is going to investigate the table. It's going to look at all the rows. It's going to figure out what type of data it is. So you can see race ID is a number, a year. This is an attribute, so it knows it's text. It identified F1 date as a date field. So it just brings everything in. It gives some baseline distributions. So you can see, if I kind of spread this out a little, the year 2021 has more races. If we go back to 2006, there's less. So, we don't have as many old data here. Also here, if you notice on the scores, it goes from 3.2 to 9.45. But you also see this bar up here of red markers. And what this is telling you is that there's only 23% are valid. The rest are invalid numeric values, most likely just null values. So this gives you a quick introduction to the types of data that's available, but we want to do a couple of quick things. So I'm going to click on the word races here, and this gets us into a bit of an editor that we can change the properties of the representation of all this data. So Oracle Analytics Cloud does a great job of identifying things at first, but maybe it's not the right definition. So again, this is the same view. What we're going to do is, I don't want to see this horizontally because there's a lot of columns. I'll click on this little metadata item and it'll now show everything in a list. So you need to see all the data elements, the data type, whether you want to treat it as an attribute or a measure. An attribute is the things you typically group by. Measures are the columns that you typically want to aggregate, like the score. So if something was not determined correctly, like the race ID, it thought it was a measure because it's a numerical value, we actually don't want that. I want to treat this as an attribute. So I'm going to come in here, click on the little down arrow, change it to an attribute. So it says easy to do that. And you notice it says that it's none. There's no aggregation. The other thing I want to do is look at the score. So by default, it's set everything as aggregation to be a sum. I really don't want this. I want it to be a average, because as we aggregate, the total of the sum doesn't, or the score doesn't make sense. It's really the averages that we want. So at this point, those are the only changes you want. In a real production system, you might make more changes to these. And then I would click on save. I will give this a new data name. Maybe we'll call this races. And you would click OK. I've already done this, so I'm going to click cancel. At this point, we've saved this new data set. I'm going to go back. Again, it asked me if I want to save it, so won't let you mess up too bad. And we want to create a new data set now for the lap times. So we're just going to use the races and lap times for these experiments. So I'm going to come in and create a data set. And we're basically going to go through the same step that we did before. I'm going to pick where my data is, which is my Red Bull Autonomous Data Warehouse. I click there. I can look for schemas. If I don't want to type everything, I can expand. And when you have large amounts of tables like this, if I do something like this, I can just find my lap time. So that's really helpful when you have databases or other sources that have large amounts of values. But I'm going to drag lap times onto my palette here. Again, it's going to go through and identify all the information, figure out which are numbers, look at pit stops, and well, of course, a lot of them are none. If there's no, there is no pit stops on a lap time, then it's going to be either blank or null. We again can click on your lap times down here. It'll bring us to another view. And essentially what we want to do here is, I'm not going to go through all the other items, but the lap, we don't want to treat the lap as a number because you don't aggregate laps. It really is an attribute. So let me click on my metadata, change this lap to attribute. I will save. I will give this the name lap times. Click OK, or cancel in my case. And then we now have access to the data we want to look at. So we can now click on data. And now we can see the individual data elements we have to look at. So what we want to start looking at are kind of what are the best in races. And this is a step often called exploratory data analysis or basic exploration, lots of different terms. So we want to understand the data that we have, because what we've shown really hasn't told you too much about it. So we're going to come in and start looking at the data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the races data set. And it brings us into a palette where we can start visualizing data. So the first thing we can start doing is, well, let's grab score and the year, the name year right here. And I can just drag it onto the chart, or I can do a right click and say, I want to pick visualization. This gives you the option. You also have the option to say, create the best visualization. And then Oracle Automl Cloud will figure out what it thinks is the best. Usually does a really good job of it, but not always the best option. I'm going to click on a graph in a second. But another thing to notice is over here, it found some automatic insights. So Oracle Analytics Cloud will automatically figure out some interesting things. And here, it found some monthly seasonality in the data. If I scroll down, there's another type of seasonality by safety car. This one's overlaps with change position. So it will try and figure out interesting things that you can review at front or up front. Whether you want to accept those or not, if I wanted to, I would just click on those. But we're going to do everything ourselves because that's what the whole point of a lab is. So again, I'll click on score, my name year, do right click, pick a visualization, and we're going to select a table. But you can see there's a whole bunch of items. Here's some bar charts, line charts, scatters, pies, different ways to represent table, some graphing, networking type of information. Maps are available. You can just have individual tiles. So there's a wide range of things. We'll just select a basic table. So now we see all the table and the results. You see the names and the scores, and there's not information everywhere. So maybe what we want to do is we want to filter the data. So let's bring score up here to the filter. And what we're now going to want to do is we're going to want to filter the scores to be anything. Actually, I grabbed both of them. Sorry about that. Since I didn't deselect, I just grabbed both of these as filters, the name year and the score. I'll click on the X, get rid of name year, and now we can say, I only want to include scores between 0 and 10. And it will refresh our query. So now we're only seeing all the rows that have values between 0 and 10. I can sort this in descending order if I like, or let's do descending. So 945 was the best. If I go low to high, I can see what the worst race was. So the 2020 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was deemed the worst by fans. So we can now start using this information, what the best and the worst is, to do initial some analysis. So if I like this report, and we're just going to start here, I can just save this. And I'll just call this, how about my HO all races over. And now I have a saved report or analysis that we can do a lot of extra information with. To get back, I can just click on my left arrow in the upper left-hand corner, and this will bring me back to my main page. So at this point, we've loaded data. We created a very simple report to show what the top and the bottom races were. What I'd like to now do is I want to kind of start looking at individual races for maybe overtakes and DNFs. So this is going to be a little more robust. So I am going to click now on my lap times data set. So same way we created the previous report, we'll start adding some data. So to start off, we are going to put a filter for the race name, because what we want to do is we want to compare the two races that we thought were the best and the worst. So the worst, I think, if I remember, was the 2020 Abu Dhabi. So I can start typing in there, and I'll select Abu Dhabi. And then the other one was the 2012 Brazilian. Now I could have scrolled through the list, but we actually got two of them here. So I'll click the Brazilian one and not the British. I'll deselect that. So now I've got only those two as my filter. And I did the filter now before I even grab data. So what do we want to do? I'm going to create a line chart now that will look at the laps. I will look at the positions of the racers and the driver reference. So drag those. Actually, I could drag them on into it, create something. Let me do this again. Driver ref and position. We'll follow the hands-on labs note, create pick visualization. I'm going to click on my line chart. And this will now create a line chart. So now we see our chart showing all the different line items. We could, well, so let me explain what we're seeing, right? We're seeing the lap number here. We're seeing all the drivers, and we're seeing what the position is. Now, the interesting thing you can look at this is we have some drivers that are coming up with 34. Well, why is that? There's only 20 people in the race. Well, that's because we've got position as the number, and it uses that default aggregation of sum. What we really want to do is we want to separate the two races. So what we can do now is I can take this race name and say, I want to trellis it by rows, which simply means kind of duplicate this, but create a different line graph for each result. And now we can start really seeing some interesting differences. On the top one, the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, which was deemed the most exciting, we see there's a lot of overtakes. There's a lot of things, a lot of people, especially at the beginning of the race, going up and down changes. So these are probably accidents, spin outs, maybe early pit stops, where the 2020 Grand Prix didn't have that information. You know, the lines are pretty consistent. You see one item here for Vettel that he started, you know, it's like 12, kind of moved up to 9, went back up to 15, and finished around 14. So he moved around, but everybody else was pretty consistent, especially the top 1, 2, 3 didn't change, and 4 just moved up one spot. So that's, you know, one thing we can look at. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through and drag some additional filters on. So if we wanted to filter on the laps or the positions, we can certainly do that and get a different view. But ultimately, what this tells you is that the number of overtakes is absolutely critical for looking at what makes a race exciting. The other thing we can now do on this report is we can add some additional information. So if we wanted to add, say, a data set, we can say add a data set. And now we're going to add some race information. So I have a lot of information. You'll only have the 2 data sets. I'm going to add the races table onto here. And again, what we're going to now do is for the races, I'm going to select everything. I'm going to pick my visualization, and I am going to create a table. So by default, it's putting the table now to the right of my data. One thing I might want to do is I actually want to look at the individual rows of information about this race. And I want to move it down below. So I just clicked on the header and it kind of grays out everything. You'll notice a little green bar below these charts. I select OK, and the information now goes down there. So now I have the graphs up above, and I have a report showing all the information about a given race. So I can scroll across and look at all of this information. So this is a way to really start looking at all of this information. And I can see, you know, the overtake position is important. The score is obviously important. The years are important. So I want to do one last analysis. And this is getting into more of the statistical stuff and see if there's correlations between the data. So I'm going to click back. I'm not going to save, because I've already saved it somewhere else. And I'm going to create a new analysis based on races. So what are we going to do here? I am going to select a couple of different items. I am going to select for my races, the overtaken position, which was already calculated for us. So click there. I am going to select the score, and I'm going to select the year of the race. And what I'll do is I'm just going to drag it on here and see what it creates. So here again, I didn't tell it what visualization. It picked an auto visualization, and it created a scatter plot by default. But I want to change things around a little bit. I actually want my score to be on the y-axis. So if I move score, switch it here, it'll change the orientation. So we can kind of see that as the number of overtakes increase, the scores actually increase. But to what extent? Well, let's add a trend line. So I can come in here, say this little triple icon for the menu. I'm going to add statistics. You can add clusters, outliers, a reference line. I'm going to add a trend line. And we see what that trend line looks like. So it gives you your R squared, standard errors, residuals, all the other options. So that gives us a very clear indication that yes, as the number of overtakes increases, the higher the score. What we're now going to do is just show this in a little different way. So we're going to look at whether an accident also has this correlation. So one thing we can do is I can edit by right-clicking on the chart, go to edit. I'm going to duplicate this visualization. And the reason I want to do this is I've got the chart basically the way I want it, although I'm going to move this down below so that they're more horizontal. And the only thing I want to change for this one is instead of the overtaking, I want to do a DNF due to accident. So I'm just going to drag that and replace this value. And now we see a different chart. So it's very easy to take some analysis that you've done, replicate it with different measures, and show it in different ways. And then just the final item that we can look at is I'm going to create one more to kind of show you, a correlation plot. So I'll click score. We know DNF matters, the DNF due to accident, and the overtake position. Let's do that again. Score, DNF count, DNF due to accident, and then overtake position. Right click. I'm going to pick the visualization, and in my list, we have this correlation item here. So I click on correlation matrix, and it will add a new visualization. Well, actually, while I'm trying to figure out what's creeping along with my machine, I'm going to click on this run button. We've been doing all of this in a edit mode of Oracle Analytics Cloud. By clicking on this run button, we can get into a viewer position, meaning if you deploy this kind of as an application to end users, what would it look like without the selection bars on the right-hand side? Ah, there we go. So now we see our our correlation matrix. So we can very clearly see, of course, at the diagonal things are aligned, but there is not a correlation between the DNF count and overtake positions. There's kind of a stronger one with score in the overtake position, DNF and DNF to accident, of course. And this one's the overtake to score as well. So you can see the positive and the negative correlations. So at this point, we're going to stop with the basic exploration. There's a couple of extra tasks that you could do in your work lab, but for the sake of time, we're not going to do that right now. There's also an advanced analytics. Well, I'm just going to come here. I'm not going to save this. I'm going to go back to the list of our, the list for our workshop. And we've gone through all of these up until this task 5 correlations. We just didn't do one other task, which was the box plots, which you can do. But if you follow the directions, same process, click the variables, click box plot, and then you can get something that looks like this. There are some advanced data explorations that we can also do. And what this allows you to do is kind of looking at races in different ways. So this is inspecting the chart for how people move. You see these items come up. You can search through items, and rather than building all of this, what I'm going to do is, since I've already done this, I'm going to come back to my analytics cloud, and I'm going to just open up this report that I've already created. So we won't go through the individual steps of creating everything, but we will look at how this looks after it's been created. All right, so I'm opening up the Lab 5 notebook. And while we're not going to go over how all of these steps were created, I just want to show you kind of some additional items that we could do. And one of them is this ghost car. And what a ghost car refers to is if you use a reference position to determine what the normal value is. So let me click on here. And we see there's this new metric called delta to ghost. That was created by creating a new calculation. So at any point, you can use a right click and do an add calculation. And what this allows you to do is enter a formula. So I can drag any metric I have on races or on lap times, say the median milliseconds for a lap minus the milliseconds for cumulative, and I can create, the ghost metric. So I'd already done that, and that's what this delta to ghost is. So we can see, as the race goes along, this driver, Hulkenberg, keeps getting further and further advanced, but then something happens. They all kind of tidy up or come together. This is due to a safety car. So safety cars come out when there's a crash, and you got to slow down all the drivers so there's no more accidents or nobody gets injured, particularly as the crew's removing the car. So things bunch up. So this really shows you how things can come back together. So this gap, the number of safety cars is an important feature. So you can create new metrics, add them to the chart. And then up above, we have a different chart just showing by position how people interact with each other. And I can maximize this one. so we can get a better view of the information. So what we did here is you'll notice on certain laps, there's a square as opposed to a circle. Well, the way we did that was for the shape, I just added the pit stop flag to differentiate the shape. So it's very easy to see for each driver where they took a pit stop. And by clicking on an item or a driver, you can see where they were. So you can see this driver had 2 pit stops at the beginning around laps 14 and 17, and then another one around 54. So again, different visualizations for different needs. They give you information about how you're going to build a model. So the last thing I want to do is get into actually how we're going to build our model. So to do that, I am going to first, let's kind of move things around a little. I'm going to come here and relook at our live labs. And we're going to now go on to lab 6. And what lab 6 gives us the ability to do is show you how to do feature engineering, leveraging the database, and visualize it with Oracle Machine Learning and Oracle Analytics Cloud. So what we'll do is we're going to set up a machine learning user, we'll generate new features, we're going to train the model using AutoML, so you don't have to understand all the details of building a model. We'll add the new features to Analytics Cloud, we'll import the trained model, and then we'll predict the scores. So I'll expand all this, and I'm going to have to log back into my console. So again, I'm going to go to my console for getting into the cloud, log into my tenancy, and I should go right in because I've already in this browser window authenticated with Oracle Analytics Cloud. So where I want to go to now is I'm going to go to my autonomous data warehouse. So you'll come into Autonomous Data Warehouse. And here's our Red Bull Autonomous Database. And what we now need to do is we are going to go to our database actions. The instructions might be a little different than what you're seeing on the notes. So I can click on Oracle Machine Learning because I've already set up the users. For your labs, you will go through a couple of steps to actually create the users. And again, we have to log on with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this will put us into an environment for using Oracle Machine Learning. And there's a lot of different tasks that we can use. So I skipped over the step for the sake of time in your work labs where you actually enable this. It's just a couple of clicks. But the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to import a notebook. So if we click on our notebooks, and a notebook is an environment that allows us to work with different code that gets created and makes it very interactive. You're going to click on import. Now, in your lab docs, you'll download a Red Bull Notebooks JSON from your file system that's in your instructions. So you basically just come in here, click the file, and you would import your Red Bull notebook JSON. I've already done that. If you import, they'll come in, you click into your notebook environment. And this now gives you the ability to write machine learning code. And what I'll do is I'm going to kind of walk you through all the code pieces just to give you an idea of what it's doing. And then we'll run it with my incredible browser that is leaking oil or something. So the good thing about running these notebooks is all the code is going to actually run on the database. So things will still run quickly. But what you'll see is we have some notebooks that calculates the number of rounds. So we do some data preparation here using SQL. And since I've ran this already, you see the results. So what this is from what we created or what we saw in Oracle Analytics Cloud, we wrote some SQL to calculate new metrics, the race ID and the number of counts, et cetera. And, for the sake of timing, I'll let everybody look through these on their own. But the great thing about this is it allows you to merge into tables a lot of the change positions or the information like change positions that were created. To run this, you just click on Run All Paragraphs. So you'll click on this, it'll take a couple of minutes to run, and you'll see a progress bar that'll tell you how everything's done. So this is some new features that get generated for our machine learning tasks based on what we looked at in OAC. What we now want to do is generate a model. So we can see we have notebooks and we have Automl Experiments. If I click on Automl Experiments, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new one. So what AutoML enables you to do is point at a data set, tell it you want to predict a value based on a column, in this case, our score, and then it'll figure everything out on its own. So we're going to say predict race enjoyment score. I'm not going to put any comments here. The data source is our races table. I'll select races. Or actually, do I want to use? I'm going to use races train. So we've already split this into pre-2020 and post-2020. So I'm going to select races train. And when we do this, it will now figure out all the different columns that we're going to want to use. So we're going to want to tell it what we want to predict. So here we want to predict our score. We're going to select the prediction type. So we're going to say this is a regression. You could do classification. We specify what's called a case ID, which is what makes each row unique. In our case, it's race ID. And then if we expand, there are some additional settings. So this is where we can say, what are the maximum number of models? You can specify how long you want it to run, whether you want to use high or low service levels in the database. I'm going to change that to high. What model evaluation you want to use. You can specify the algorithms that you want. So here by default, we're going to do everything. Do you want to include or automatically exclude certain columns or features of the model? We just want to make sure these are all checked, except for race ID, and then score is your target. So that's all good. At this point, I'll scroll back up to the top. We can save the model. So I'm going to create a new one. And then at this point, I can go ahead and say start. And I can say either fast results or better accuracy. So that's going to go start running. And while this is running, you'll see an evaluation metric or a progress bar telling you all the different steps that it's going to. So it's initializing, it's going to do some algorithm selection through all of them. It's going to do some sampling. It's going to figure out which features are most important, so it doesn't have to use all of them. It's going to tune the model, etc. So you can see the progress. And down here, you see a leaderboard. So this support vector machine is the best model so far. We're basing this on mean square error. So you can see how it goes through each individual one, how it's progressing. So I'm going to let that one run. And we can go back to our experiments because I've already completed one. So if I come in here, now I can see the final one. And this one, actually, the support vector machine had the lowest error. Yeah, not great, but we did something really quick and fast. So at this point, the next steps that we would go through is we would go back, or we will go back to our autonomous data warehouse. And since all of that was created, I'm sorry, wrong on screen. We will come here. And if I come back to my homepage, what we would want to do is we're going to want to come over to our data. So I click on the right click here, say open, and we get to our data editor. I didn't want to actually modify anything. And what we're going to do here is we're going to edit the definition. And what it's going to do is it's going to go look for new columns. And rather than scrolling through everything, I'm going to click on add all. And what you now see is laps with change position, max comeback score, safety. All of these columns, which we built with our model, were added into our data element. So we select OK, we save them. And now what we've done is we've ran those notebooks from AutoML. We saved the information into the table, into the races table. We've now re-imported all those predictive metrics back into Oracle Analytics Cloud. And what we can now do is start looking at scores. Well, let me change that. We imported all those calculated measures. Final thing we do in the last 2 minutes is we actually have to import that model into Oracle Analytics Cloud. And the way we do that is we go back home, we click on this triple icon, and we're going to want to register a model from our machine learning models. So what this does is it goes into my specify the Red Bull model. And here's a list of all the models that were created. You'll see some that I did last week and others that were just created now. And we use our support vector machine. I could pick either one. And I'm basically saying this model that was created that targeted the score, and I can look at the input columns, et cetera. I want to register that as a model within Oracle Analytics Cloud. So what that allows you to do now is we can leverage a functionality called data flows. And what a data flow allows you to do is run some processing. And what this processing we're going to do is we're going to take our input data, we're going to run it through the model, and then we're going to load it into another area that we can then predict. So here we'll come and select create data flow. We will got to add some data. So we're going to click on our races table. And this races table now has those additional metrics, those input variables that we used before. We're going to add a filter here because we don't want to do all the rows. We only want to filter 2020 data. So click over here. I could have clicked on that, or I'll click over here. I'm going to look for races. The race ID. And here, what we just want to do is we want to do 2020 races. So we're just going to build our model on the 2020 data, since we trained it on everything through 2019. So now we're taking races, we're filtering it just to the 2020 data. And the next thing we want to do is we want to add a new object for our prediction. Let me move this over so it looks a little better. So rather than looking through this long list, again, I'm going to use my search to do a prediction. Apply model. So I drag apply model here. I'm going to say we're going to use my SVMG model that we just created. It creates a new column called prediction, which is nice. We are going to now add an additional item for selecting columns. So that it selects everything. And then the last one I want to do is a save data set. So what my flow is doing, just to recap in the last minute, is I take the input table of my races, I filter it down to 2020, I apply a model, my machine learning model, it creates everything over here. And what this allows us to finally do after this runs and does all the scoring is it allows us to create a new visualization. So if I come back to my home, look at my workbooks, and look at my race predictions, we see now we have, I'm going to go into edit mode to show everybody how this was created, was I now have a line chart, which has from my predicted scores data set, I have my score and the predicted values along the y-axis, my x-axis, the race ID, and the name, and we can now compare how well it did for all these 2020 races up to that point. So with that, I know we're at the bottom of the hour, but I just kind of want to recap what we went through. We created a OAC instance, we created an autonomous data warehouse, all with just a few clicks and fill in a couple of parameters. And that created the environment within 3 or 4 minutes, I think it was for all of you. We then loaded the data into the data warehouse from a series of CSV files. We then used OAC to point it at those tables. And then we used the graphical capabilities to interact with the table and investigate and explore all the information in those databases. From there, we identified a couple of key features that we thought were important, and we used the AutoML capabilities of the Autonomous Data Warehouse to train a model. And then at the end, rather clumsily, I created a data flow that would take the table, the input table of races, apply that model, predict the race scores at the end, and then visualize it within OAC. So it's all kind of an end-to-end process that allows you to kind of go from nothing to a predicted model all within about 90 to 120 minutes. So with that, just want to kind of give you an update on some upcoming events. You can look at this bit.ly link for more developer events for lots of different topics, not just analytics and machine learning, but we cross the spectrum across a wide range of topics that are relevant to developers. Please reach out to us with any questions about the lab itself, more details about what we talked about. If you'd like to just discuss other applications and how we could help you out, please let us know. There's a link for feedback. I'm sure we'll get some good feedback about the screen performance. But you have this access to your tenancy, all for free. I encourage you to walk through the steps, really understand how things move together, and ask us questions. We appreciate you all attending today and hope you enjoyed and learned a little bit about F1 racing and what factors actually affect what is an enjoyable or exciting race. So with that, thank you all. Have a great day, evening, morning.
Thank you.